Welcome to War Room, the official podcast of the U.S. Army War College online journal, graciously supported by the Army War College Foundation. Please join the conversation at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. We hope you enjoy the program.
Hello, and welcome to the War Room podcast. I'm Jackie Witt, Professor of Strategy at the Army War College and the War Room podcast editor. We're recording here today at Carlisle Barracks, and we thank you for joining us as well, from wherever you are. Today's podcast highlights one of the most important aspects of the War College curriculum and of strategic studies more broadly. That is, gaining a deeper expertise in the culture, history, politics, and security of countries and regions around the globe. Often, these explorations and discussions are framed in terms of understanding an adversary or a competitor, but I think this process is equally important, perhaps even more so, for allies and partners. On today's podcast, we're going to take the opportunity to discuss regional security and the U.S. relationship with Europe, where there are myriad challenges and opportunities and a lot of history. And these challenges and opportunities exist not only bilaterally between the U.S. and specific countries, but also multilaterally. Organizations such as NATO and the European Union are particularly important for understanding the security environment in Europe and the U.S.-Europe relationship more broadly. We are joined in the studio with Colonel Darrell Driver, who is the Director of European Studies at the War College, and Mr. Ludwig Blaurock, a native of Germany and the Counsellor for Political and Military Affairs, Security and Development section in the Delegation of the European Union to the United States. So let's turn now to their discussion.
Hello, I'm Darrell Driver, and I'm joined today by Mr. Ludwig Blaurock of the EU Delegation in Washington. Welcome to the program, Ludwig.
Hey, Darrell. Good morning. Thanks for having me.
I'd like to start maybe by asking you to sort of spend a few minutes just talking a little bit about your expertise and how you come to work for the EU delegation, particularly in the area of security affairs.
Sure. So originally I'm out of the German Foreign Office, and I've been working on security policy basically since I started there, starting on the NATO desk and then moving on to the German Chancellery, which is basically the Chancellor's office of Madame Merkel. So kind of the National Security Council there, where I worked on security policy issues for a couple of years. And then I was posted with the German Embassy to Tel Aviv, Israel, as a consul there and working on security issues as well, but also more consular and occupational issues on the occupied territories. And then from there, I applied for the European Union Service, which is an integrated service for the European Union, kind of the European Union Foreign Service that came into being after the Lisbon Treaty. And it's a fairly young service, but a third of its officers and officials come out of national diplomatic services. So it's an integrated service from the European Union, serving all of the Union and its member states abroad.
Well, you certainly have had no shortage of topics and issues that have emerged over the last 3 years in your current assignment, I would assume. What do you spend, sort of start with something broad, what do you spend most of your time on today? What's really sort of the overarching security issue or issues with which you deal on a daily basis?
So there's a couple issues. I think one of the biggest issues that have been occupying all of us in the past weeks or months probably is non-proliferation, nuclear non-proliferation, mainly the Iran deal, obviously also North Korea. But on the Iran deal, the JCPOA, as we call it, the European Union has a very special role. Our big boss, the High Representative Mogherini, is kind of a facilitator and guarantor of that deal in a certain way. And so that's been a main topic and main priority for us, as nuclear non-proliferation has been one of the sort of top tier issues that we've been dealing with. More broadly, though, there's a lot also of explaining what the European Union is actually doing in security policy writ large. To an American audience, sort of a lot of outreach, building bridges to the security community in Washington, D.C., so the Pentagon, National Security Council, finding ways of where we can cooperate. So there's a wide range of issues from sort of top-tier issues, as I just said, sort of nuclear non-proliferation, the Iran deal, down to sort of small, more technical areas, intelligence sharing for missions and operations that we have as European Union abroad, where the U.S. is very valuable partner, and where we can develop that relationship.
Well, a lot has certainly been made over the tension, if you will, between the European Union and the U.S. with respect to the Iran deal of late. How would you, just sort of taking that out to the broader perspective that you just described, how would you describe sort of the current state of relationship between the European Union and the U.S., especially with regard to security matters? Would you give it a more or less positive grade? Or
Oh, absolutely. No, I mean, it's been overall, I think the relationship as it has developed between the U.S. and the European Union, particularly in the security policy field, has been extraordinary. Really a sort of incremental growth in the beginning, sort of small steps, but it's been exponential over the past years. So we're in a very good shape. And the Iran deal, as you said, there was lots of tension there. Actually, I wouldn't say tension, it's a lot of discussion, because we agree completely on the end state. There's full agreement on strategic goals and objectives that we have here. There's disagreement sometimes on the modalities how to get there, and that's where we need discussion. But that's the true hallmark of a strong partnership, that we can discuss these in full openness and frankness and exchange those views to get to the ideal goal that we both share. So I think it's a very strong relationship, and we're in very good shape.
And I know this is sort of a little bit far afield from your current job, but I know in the past you've had at least some relationship in dealing with the NATO portfolio. I guess same question for NATO. How would you describe the evolving European Union-NATO relationship?
That's something almost revolutionary, I would say. If you follow the relationship over the decades, of course, you understand that there's sort of political hindrances that come from the memberships that are almost overlapping with, or very much overlapping with both institutions, but some are not, and that's where some political sort of differences come in and blocks come in. But pushing that aside has been the big advance of the past years. At the NATO-Warsaw summit, there was a joint declaration, and I would say a historic joint declaration between NATO and the EU, to decide to work together on 7 big, broad areas that were defined, with a whole lot of sort of very pragmatic, forward-looking, ambitious, practical steps to work on. And that has changed the relationship absolutely for the better. I think just the mindset has changed absolutely. While before there was a tendency not to talk to each other, although, I mean, locally speaking, one is in Brussels airport, one is in Brussels in a city. People wouldn't talk to each other because they were afraid of doing so. There was a sensitivity about it. Now it's the complete opposite. And starting from the top, the NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg and my big boss, the High Representative Mogherini, they get along very well. There's not a NATO meeting where the EU is not present. There's not an EU foreign ministers meeting on security where the NATO Secretary is not, and the Secretary General is not invited. And the relationship has really changed 180%. Everybody understands we need to work together. Necessity is there, the logic is there, and now finally the pragmatism is there to do that.
I can say in one of my previous jobs that there was certainly good cooperation at the staff-to-staff level when it comes to such things as defense planning, which we share a lot of information between NATO and the European Union. Now, there's certainly one of the sort of developments that have made a lot of waves, if you will, in recent months, I should say, with respect to the common security and defense policy, are some of the more ambitious aspirations for, we've heard terms like permanent structured cooperation and the triple decision package. I wonder if you might say a little bit about what that is and where it's going.
No, absolutely. I think where it really comes from, it stems from the understanding in Europe that our security environment has changed for the worse, unfortunately, again. Within the European Union, the response has been to come up with a new global strategy. That's kind of the highest strategic security document that we have in 2016, presented by the High Representative Mogherini. It was agreed upon by the 28 member states. And it basically sets out a vision of the world that is way more realistic in terms of how dangerous the security environment has become. It states very clearly that it's a more complex, a more contested security environment that we have to deal with. And so the European Union, as European Union, has to step up its game. We really have to react to it. And that's really where it all comes from. And that has started in what you said, this triple decision package, on working within the foreign and security policy realm of the European Union, within the Commission's realm, which is the part that sort of initially was at the core of the Commission, and then working on the NATO-EU part, which is the third part, the third leg, if you wish. Because there's an understanding we really need to do all three together. Just one of them doesn't make sense. And within that realm, there's a whole lot of initiatives that have been started, some of them very groundbreaking. One of them you mentioned already, the Permanent Structured Cooperation. We call it in the sort of the acronym is PESCO. And what PESCO does basically is it's a legal framework where 25 out of 28 member states have come together and agreed we will be way more ambitious in what we do. We will be inclusive, so we'll do it together. And we'll move forward to really progress on capabilities that we did not have as a union, where we lack clear strategic enablers, we lack a lot of capabilities that we found both in NATO and the EU. We don't have at our disposal, and PESCO is the vehicle to push that forward. The good news about it is open, as I said. It's a flexible instrument. It is open for all member states to join, and it actually even has an opening to third countries who want to join in individual projects. The other good news is that all the projects that will be working under PESCO, and 16 projects have been already laid on the table and agreed upon, and they will be start working on those. All of those will remain in the remit of the member states that start working on them. So it will not be EU owned and operated. It will be facilitated by the EU, pushed for by the EU. The EU will be the one looking at it and also holding member states accountable that they really move forward quickly and ambitiously and aggressively on these issues. but it will remain in the remit of the national armed forces of our member states. And as such, because we have a single set of forces in Europe, those developments will be beneficial for NATO as well. So complementary is built in between NATO and the EU in this project as well. So it is really very good news, and I'm quite satisfied with how far we've gone. Now those big decisions have been taken. Now it's time to get to work, and hopefully we'll see a lot of progress in practical terms on these projects.
Certainly, and sort of one of the developments that's at least in the backdrop of this discussion is the UK's pending exit from the European Union. In light of PESCO and in light of these developments, what do you foresee as sort of the future defense or security relationship between the UK and the European Union?
I mean, first of all, let me start with saying how much we all regret that decision by the people of Great Britain to leave. Of course, we recognize it and we respect it, but still, it's with big regret. Now, coming to the security relationship, I think it's an area where we don't really know how it will look like, but we know for sure that it will be a very close relationship. Both the British Prime Minister, Theresa May, has said so. Both the European institutional leadership and member states, heads of state and government, have very clearly pronounced that they want a very strong relationship with the UK in that area as well. There are some forms already where the European Union Common Security and Foreign Policy has been working with third country partners in a very close matter. Some third countries have already participated in EU operations and missions abroad, military operations, civilian missions as well. So there are frameworks available. We don't know yet exactly how that framework will look like with the UK, but we're sure, and the lead negotiator for the European Union, Mr. Barnier, has also said so. We're looking for a very close relationship with the UK, and the UK has said the same. So I think we ought not to be too worried about it. I believe there will be a very close relationship on that because it's in both our interests and declaredly so.
Right. And, certainly in this area and many others, I can think of one in particular, the freedom of movement across Europe has been on the top of NATO's wish list in terms of an agreement with the European Union. Some of it called it a military Schengen zone, if you will, for free movement so that these border restrictions can be relaxed maybe, or at least made a little more uniform. How do you foresee that going? Is there hopes that we might get to some agreement that allows for freedom of movement, a military Schengen zone?
I'm actually quite hopeful on this. When we call back, this whole topic has come up because we realized that we really need to think strategically again and restart our contingency planning in a different way and shape and form since we've seen what Russia has done in Ukraine. So that has kicked off that thinking and that development. Within the European Union already past fall, the Commission services and the European Union as such has put on the table a proposal to work within the European Union on these matters, on military mobility. And in December, when the 1 year sort of taking stock exercise of the NATO-EU joint declaration, which I mentioned before, sort of this groundbreaking decision to work in a really different quality together, when they came together, they assessed how much progress had been done and they added on a couple of new tasks and new areas. Military mobility was a key point in that because we understand that military mobility is two things in Europe. One is the practical sort of technical logistics to make the railroads, the connectors, the pathways that you need to move military equipment through Europe. The other part is the legal part, the regulatory framework. And in both of these, the European Union has the instruments to answer and to move forward things. So I'm quite optimistic that we'll come through it. I think it will be a very cumbersome, difficult work when you go through all the different regulations that you need, the licensing work, the civil, military areas. But that's exactly what NATO-EU cooperation can bring forward, because then finally we have all the tools we need together in a joint effort, which we did not have before when NATO and the EU were doing these things separately.
So pretty positive on the future of NATO.
Absolutely. No, I'm very positive. I'm really quite excited about it. And I think that's one of the biggest and best news that we've had, that finally we've overcome some of the political sensibilities that still exist, but to get together and say, well, necessity and logic demands that we work very strongly together and we're committed to do that. And finally we have the political leadership to do that. And it really puts me in a very positive sort of outlook into the future.
So just one final question, Ludwig, and thank you again for joining us today. But you're going to speak to a room full of future security leaders across the interagency, the U.S. Army, the other services, in a couple hours. What would you say is the one sort of overarching message you would like them to take away from that discussion today?
That's a good one. Let me, if I had to put it down into sort of one very short sort of answer, I'd probably say, if they get away with the feeling that Europe and the European Union is your partner of choice for the United States, that would be it. Because I think we are. When you look around in the world, who else? Who else is out there who shares the values, who shares the objectives, who's been working historically over decades together in such a close and close manner, not only in NATO but overall? I think that would be the answer. Sort of think of Europe and the European Union as your partner of choice.
I like the message.
Thanks.
Thank you again for joining us, and I appreciate your time, and I certainly look forward to our discussion later today. Thank you, Lou.
Thank you very much, Darrell. Thanks. Bye-bye.
And that concludes our program. Thank you for listening. The views expressed in this podcast reflect those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views, policies, or positions of the U.S. Army or the Department of Defense. Let us know what you think. Provide us your feedback, comments, or suggestions through our webpage at warroom.armywarcollege.edu. And have a great day.